Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and welcome back to another episode of the Zhuge Liang Northern Expedition Lore Series as we continue with episode 10, titled Cao Zhen's Gambit. Now, in our last episode, we covered Zhuge Liang's third northern expedition, which resulted in the incremental gains of the Wudu and E10 commanderies. But alongside these gains came the Wei response, as Cao Zhen, tired of Shu Han's constant northern expeditions, appealed to the Wei court in July of 230 for massive Wei counterattack as he seeked to retake the initiative out west. Approved by Emperor Cao Rui after a much heated discussion at court, the final Wei attack plan involved a three-pronged attack targeting Hanzhong, with Cao Zhen and the Wei western forces taking the Ziwu path to attack Hanzhong from the east. At the same time, Sima Yi and the central Wei army would take the long way around the safer Mount Qi path to retake Wudu commandery and attack Hanzhong from the west, all while Zhang He, Guo Huai, and Fei Yao would lead a smaller Wei attachment to take the Baoxie path, restoring it and attacking Hanzhong from the north. While this plan, if carried out properly, would seriously threaten Hanzhong and the very survival of the kingdom of Shu Han, carrying out such a massive military operation while contending with the natural elements such as the mountainous terrains and the weather at large would soon prove almost impossible for the Wei forces. First, even before Mother Nature would join the fight, Zhuge Liang did his job in setting up the Shu Han defense as he reinforced the newly built fortifications in Hanzhong. In terms of manpower, Zhuge Liang summoned Li Yan, who was in charge of the borders with Wu, as he requested 20,000 additional fresh troops that were stationed in the south. Now remember that Li Yan was the other co-regent handpicked by Liu Bei for Liu Shan, as Li Yan represented the Dongzhou group within the Yi province, since Liu Bei's main concern upon his death is that the original Yi province gentry clans might not submit to his son and support his young regime. So in order to shore up political support to counteract the local gentry influence, Liu Bei would choose Zhuge Liang and Li Yan as co-regents, as these two were the leaders of the Jin province clique and the Dongzhou clique, which were both opposed by the local Yi province gentry clique, as the interactions between these three groups politically would play a large role in determining the fate of the kingdom of Shu Han, especially after Zhuge Liang's death, as while Zhuge Liang was alive, his close relationship with the emperor and his dominance of politics and military forces temporarily neutralized all conflicts between these three groups. And it is pretty clear with the summoning of Li Yan here that even though both Zhuge Liang and Li Yan were co-regents, Zhuge Liang clearly outranked Li Yan in both power and influence. But to encourage Li Yan into following these orders, Zhuge Liang did have to also promote Li Yan's son, Li Feng, to become the director of the Jiang province in charge of this eastern borders with Wu in Li Yan's absence. But at the end of the day, the Shu Han mobilization here would not be needed, as multiple things would go wrong for Wei from the onset of this campaign. First off, Cao Zhen would name Xiahou Ba, the second son of Xiahou Yuan, as his vanguard, while Xiahou Ba had been serving under his father and then Guo Huai since his youth. He was still largely inexperienced as a commander, and this campaign would be his first opportunity at commanding a unit himself. And as his vanguard forces would step into the treacherous Ziwu path, they would soon be spotted by locals who would report the position of Xiahou Ba's camp to the Shu Han forces. Then hearing that the commander of this vanguard group was the unproven Xiahou Ba, the Shu Han forces were not even stressed, as they would soon strike his camp unexpectedly. And surprised at this sudden appearance of Shu Han forces, Xiahou Ba's forces would start to show signs of a full rout. But thankfully, Xiahouba was still brave enough to charge out himself from the encampment to fight amongst his men to defend their camp. And this would eventually stabilize morale and buy enough time for the main army behind to arrive, which would force the Shuhan strike force to retreat. But even though the vanguard forces did not rout, they still took heavy losses in this initial exchange. Yet this skirmish would not be the worst news for Cao Zhen, as not long after the main army entered the Ziwu Path, which was the shortest and most direct path through the Qingling mountain ranges, the weather turned as the late summer rain drenched the already dangerous path. Now, theoretically, a small force would need maybe 10 to 15 days to complete the march out of Ziwu Path. But with the size of Cao Zhen's army and rain complicating the matters, Cao Zhen would have to spend a full month of marching just to reach half of the distance. Not only was Cao Zhen's army moving too slowly, the conditions from the weather was also leading to higher than expected attrition and supply issues, which led to farther concerns within the Wei imperial court, especially since opinions on this offensive campaign was already divided even in the beginning stages. So in early September of 230, with Cao Zhen still struggling in the Ziwu Path, a collective of highly ranked Wei officials, including the likes of Hua Xin, Yang Fu, and Wang Su, would plead with Emperor Cao Rui to call off this campaign. Now, Hua Xin at this time was the Grand Commandant of Wei. Yang Fu was a local of Wudu who knew the conditions of these paths out west, and Wang Su was a key imperial court attendant and the son of the late Wang Lang. And under their insistence, Cao Rui would order all three army groups to halt and retreat, as this entire campaign was called off. Now, this decision was also made easier when news of a successful Shuhan counterattack led by Wei Yan against Guo Huai and Fei Yao's unit in the other front reached the Wei courts, as it has become clear that the disjointed nature of this three-front campaign will only end in disaster, especially with Cao Zhen's forces stuck in the Ziwu Path. So after 2 lost skirmishes and a month-long battle against the elements, Cao Zhen was forced by the court to abandon his grand campaign, which not only damaged his pride but also his health, as he would return to court in late 230 with an illness that he just could not shake, as he would eventually succumb to it in the summer of the following year. And because of the back-to-back death of the Grand General position within the Wei court, with Cao Xiu first perishing not long after his defeat at the Battle of Shiting, which prompted the promotion of Cao Zhen to the position, and now with Cao Zhen dying not long after his failed gambit on the Ziwu Path, the Wei court had to turn to Sima Yi, who was the only military talent left of the 4 co-regents handpicked by Cao Pi, as the last remaining regent, Chen Qun, was better suited for the court. So after 3 northern expeditions and 1 failed Wei counterattack, we are now finally set up to see the famed matchup between Sima Yi and Zhuge Liang, as the Wei court will hand over the task of defending the western front to Sima Yi for Zhuge Liang's final 2 northern expeditions. Now, to be clear, when Zhuge Liang launched his 4th northern expedition in spring of 231, Cao Zhen was still alive, but he was too ill and just months away from dying to resume his duties as the general of the West. And speaking of this 4th northern expedition, not long after Wei's retreat, Zhuge Liang would wait for the weather to turn, as after a very wet summer, there will be 6 months without rain that will last until late spring of 231, which is when Zhuge Liang would get his 4th northern expedition officially underway, as this time he wanted to take full advantage of the newly acquired Wudu commandery to give Mount Qi Path one final chance, as the entire Shuhan army would once again mobilize and arrive at the doorsteps of Mount Qi Castle. And with that, our episode comes to an end, as we'll continue next time to see Sima Yi's response to Zhuge Liang's attack. And hopefully you all have enjoyed this episode enough to hit that like button to help support the channel. And I'll see you all next time. Bye.